the rest of this will talk about how you share data from one project to another or one GIS system to another, from yourself to an outside person outside of your organization. So we've experienced a little bit of that in our assignments, and we've hit some road bumps. So I thought it was worth touching on some of those details again, but also going over a little bit more general information about data exchange outside of the immediate ArcGIS Pro system. So when we talk about vector data, we have used shapefiles extensively to use to incorporate the lab data into our lab projects. We've used geodatabases a little bit now, but there's some other formats that are less familiar, or maybe some of them might be even more familiar to you. So one system that's a little bit maybe less identified with GIS, but it is a spatial coordinate system for showing coordinates on basically a flat surface like a map, is a page coordinate system. You most often see those in layouts for printers, but they are spatial reference systems and could be used to communicate information. They aren't spatially located in the sense of our geographic world, so aren't necessarily helpful in transferring information from the Earth to our computer and back to whoever needs to use that again on the Earth. But there are some other types of vector data formats outside of the shapefile. So one that's probably really familiar to you is the KML format that Google Earth uses, or it might be familiar to some of you. KMZs or KMLs are a vector format. They also include some style information within them that makes them a little bit harder to translate from an XY coordinate with some attributes assigned. There's some other coding, HTML coding language that goes behind that. And then another common data exchange system, I can't remember if we looked at a USGS topo map now, but one of the common download formats for USGS topo maps, which you can no longer order up on paper at your map store. You have to special order paper maps if you want them. But the system that the USGS uses to distribute the US topo maps now is a GeoPDF. So it's a PDF that has embedded spatial information in them. As far as I've been able to tell, the only way to view that information is in lat-long coordinates. I haven't found any PDFs that will interpret like a state plane coordinate system or other XY information. So there's some limitations there on the GeoPDF format, I believe. But another advantage that most of these GeoPDFs have is the ability to control layering. So you can have a layer for your grid so your users can turn off your grid. And if you got a little bit more sophisticated, you could have your roads on a separate layer than some of your other information. And in the layer pane for most PDF viewers, your users would be able to turn off things that are distracting from what they're trying to visualize. And then they can use the GeoPDF tools, which are, they're now standard in Adobe Acrobat, I know for sure. There's a tool, a measure tool for looking at coordinates on a map as you move around the map in a GeoPDF. And then there's also some measure tools that measure in the coordinate system so you could determine the length of a road in real world units. And I believe that's also standard in some of the free PDF readers that are available that have GeoPDF capabilities. So it's somewhat of a universal format. It was created as a proprietary system, but since it's been adopted by USGS, it's a little bit more universally available now.
So this is a system that all these online map viewers are using, that you can look at like topo maps or aviation charts and whatnot. These are stitched together, these GeoPDFs?
Yeah, a lot of them are based on this TerraGo technology that was developed for USGS. I'm not sure about universally, but I think any of the ones that are PDF format use this technology. I think I saw them recently. Somebody was looking at some ski maps. I forget the name of the common app that people use them to read them, but they're trail maps published in a GeoPDF format. So stepping back to the KML format, this is what I was getting at in terms of style information that goes along with it. So you have your attribute information and your code. And if you have built-in style, say you want your line weight to be set or your color of your point to be set, that can all be scripted into your HTML language that goes along with your KML file. So I should have found an example that had some style in it, but I'll have to update that later. And you can edit them in the code. I've done it a couple of times and it can be really painful, but it's possible.
Brenna, I'm sorry, are you displaying something right now?
Oh, can you guys not see my screen?
No.
Ah, that would explain the lack of questions. All right, you can now see the KML code sample.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So you probably couldn't also see my screen when I was talking about GeoPDFs. So this is kind of an older example of a GeoPDF in Adobe Acrobat. So you can't see terribly well, but in this screen, you can move around the map and see the coordinates. And then there's some measurement tools available as well. So, and then this is just a sample of the HTML code used in a KML or a KMZ file. And I'm not going to get into style scripting for KML files, but if you have any that you've downloaded that have built-in styles and you ever wondered how it knew how to display them, you can crack them open and it's pretty straightforward to figure out the code. It'll have point colors and line weights or point styles for different shapes built into the code. So these are a couple of vector data formats that are really not widely used anymore. So the digital line graph from USGS used to be a way that they shared vector data from US topo maps. Again, that's not something that's widely used or distributed anymore, but probably still available somewhere. And then the Tiger data that you guys used, you used in a shapefile format, but was originated within the Census Bureau from a specific set of vector information. So that's a little bit more of a historic information for you guys. So shapefiles, what is a shapefile? We talked about shapefiles really early on. Hopefully this slide is familiar to you, but it became very clear when I asked everybody to submit a shapefile for the final project that there was still some confusion remaining on what exactly a shapefile is. And I do think it's really critical that you leave this class knowing how to both use shapefiles that you receive, which you've done frequently in your labs, but also provide shapefiles to other people. So I am going to kick this dead horse one more time and try to reinforce the concept of what a shapefile is. We use the word shapefile to reference a collection of files that creates the spatial information in a shapefile. So when you look at the information within ArcCatalog, or the catalog pane or the catalog window within ArcGIS Pro, you see a shapefile represented as one line item. But every shapefile, as we now know, comes with multiple attached file types. 3 of the key file types are the .shape, the .shx, and the .dbf. And they all have to be named with the same starting name. So this city's shapefile is not related in any way to this city ranks.dbf file shown on the screen here. So the city's shapefile does include a DBF database format. The city ranks.dbf file doesn't have any of the accompanying file types needed to create a shapefile. So the city ranks DBF is not a shapefile. It will not work on its own in any GIS system. It may be missing its buddies that used to be in here with it, or it may be some totally unrelated database format that has nothing to do with ArcGIS, which can be one of the confusions of looking at your file sets in Windows Explorer. And one of the reasons that many people stay primarily within the catalog view, because if you were to rename this rivers file here, that would apply to all of the pieces of the rivers shapefile. If you move this rivers file from one file to another file in the catalog, or from one folder to another, all of the accompanying files will go with it into that folder. So it's really important when you're viewing your shapefiles in a Windows Explorer environment that you understand that all of those pieces go together. And it's similar with certain types of raster data sets. We looked at a couple of raster products in some of your labs that had folders that accompanied them. And it's important that all of those pieces stay together. And if you're stepping into a GIS project after it's already been created, sometimes it can be difficult to see how those pieces relate, especially if you're not aware of the problem. So make sure when you're working with a data set and transferring that data, it's always a good idea to take what you've produced and test it in a new project to make sure that it actually does what you want it to do. If I'm giving deliverables to a client that include spatial information, I absolutely never send it to my client without making sure that I can open it in a unrelated project and that it plots correctly, because that's another embarrassing mistake that I've learned from. It can also waste time or cause problems for other people, especially if they're trying to take that information out in the field where you might not be able to fix it. So along with the primary files, there's the accessory files that goes into a shapefile. So again, it may be the 5 files listed here, but there are other file types that can go with it. And I think in the test ones I was doing for you guys, I got 10 different ones. So we're going to talk a little bit about the many ways that you can export shapefiles from ArcGIS Pro. And really they boil down to 2 tools within your toolbox. So I want to make sure that you all remember the toolbox. So your license, and actually even a basic Esri license comes with some tools in the toolbox. Your toolboxes, by virtue of your license, come with many, many toolboxes. And these are toolboxes that you may not even realize how much you've been using lately, because a lot of the tools that we use on a regular basis are in this toolbox environment, but not necessarily easily recognizable that way. You can search your toolbox in order to find your tools, or you can save your favorites. Got a few favorites that I use a lot saved here. And then it'll also keep track of ones that you use recently in order to use them again. So the last one I used was feature class to shapefile. The one I used before that was feature class to feature class. So those are the two tools that we're going to talk about. And we're also going to talk about the many different ways that you can find them within ArcGIS Pro without even knowing that you're using them, and some of the unexpected outcomes of using them, because I feel like they've really made this far more complex than it needs to be. So if you are exporting a shapefile from a feature class in ArcGIS Pro, can somebody tell me how you would go about doing it? Let's hear somebody new that we never hear from. Be brave. Or we can pull on an old reliable person who answers lots of questions. Oh, I see somebody in the chat. In the share tab, Megan suggests. So that's actually one thing that I haven't used a lot. So you can package pieces of your project from the share tab. You can share your map in different ways. I'm not sure that there is a way to share a feature class as a shapefile from the share tab, unless you can tell me I'm wrong, Megan. So you might think it would be in the share tab, but I'm not leaping at it, so that wasn't the answer I was looking for. Doesn't mean that I'm not wrong.
I think one of the ways you can do it in the table of contents on the left, you can right click on what you're interested in, and then there is an export feature.
Okay, so we will export. I have a water edge file, very, very simple feature class in my project data geodatabase. So if I go to data, export features, you will see this tool come up, which is actually the feature class to feature class toolbox tool. It's just been disguised for you. So that's one helpful thing to get used to looking at, is how the tools process. But in ArcGIS Pro, they've tried to get fancy and rename things to make it easier for you. So one way to figure out why it's been confusing that things aren't behaving kind of the way I expected, or the way you guys might have expected, is the export features tool is using the feature class to feature class conversion tool, which will default to making a geodatabase feature class, but it can also create a shapefile. So how does it know when you want to make a shapefile? You don't put it in a geodatabase, for one, right? A geodatabase can't hold a shapefile. It converts a shapefile into a feature class. So if I go into my folders and I find another folder that is not a geodatabase, right? This is my geodatabase folder, but I have this one here sorry, if I select this as my output location, I now can say okay. And I know it's not going to write a feature class there. So I can try that, and I can name it something spelled correctly, water edge. And I can put underscores. I don't recommend using spaces and shapefile names ever. And see what we output there. So here's my project folder. There's my test location. And you can see, because I have pointed it at a folder that does not contain, that is not a geodatabase, it's defaulted to making a shapefile. So how would I share this shapefile with somebody else?
You could take everything that says water edge and put it into a new folder and share that folder
Okay.
in an email format or something.
So one thing to notice here, there's 2 lock files. Those were created because it's open in ArcGIS, right? So if I remove these right now, if I take that off, those will go away. Or I could just not copy those files because they're not going to work for anybody but me. So I can take this and I can put it into a new folder. And I've now isolated them. You can't attach a folder to an email though. I don't know if you guys know that. I don't know of any email client that will let you do that. So what would be the next step I would need if I want to send these?
Zip them down.
There you go. So I think I showed you guys a couple of zip tools. There's the built-in one for Windows, right? Oops. When I select this folder and I want to share it, there's a zip option here, or you can download a free tool like 7-zip, which I recommend anybody using GIS. This is one of my favorite free tools out there because there's a lot of weird formats that you get really large GIS files in that 7-zip can extract that's not part of the built-in Windows zip file. So if you know your recipient was using 7Z, they have this really nice 7Z zip file format that's a lot more efficient than a .zip file. Or you can just go with the tried and true. I never use 7Z if I don't know the person I'm sending it to. And now I have a zip file. So there's a million different ways that you can go about zipping a file. There's free services online. But you can't attach a folder to an email. You can attach all of these files to the email. So sometimes I get shapefiles that are just, 10 different files attached to an email, but that can be really confusing to somebody that doesn't really understand a shapefile. So it's pretty common to receive them or send them in a zipped format. So yeah, that's one of the easiest ways to package a single feature class to be shared as a shapefile. Does anybody know other ways to approach the same thing? So I don't know if you guys use your catalog very much, but I've gotten very fond of this. It's somewhat of a new function in ArcGIS Pro. The catalog was built into ArcMap, but a little bit more buried. But now you can access your whole project catalog right here on the side and also look at your online data. I have a million things in my favorites now because I get tired of hunting, though now it's getting so crowded that I have to hunt through my favorites. But your project data is all in your catalog project pane. So that includes your project's geodatabase and all of these layers, most of which I've added to the map, but it also includes layers that aren't part of my map. And you can perform actions on things even if you haven't added them to your map here. So that's another really helpful way to approach packaging your data. And it's helpful also to notice that there's two different ways that you can go about this, right? So you can export feature class to other types of data. We're not going to get into feature class to CAD goes to a drawing format. Feature class to feature class can move it to another feature class. Feature class to geodatabase can move it to another geodatabase. But the two that we're going to look at, we've already done a feature class to feature class, which is actually what this feature class to shapefile takes you to, right? I told you there's a lot of tools that are named differently in where you access them in ArcGIS Pro versus the actual toolbox that opens. So that's another way to get at the same exact tool that we just used. Or you can use the other option there, which is feature classes to shapefiles. And this is kind of an interesting approach because you don't specify a name for your shapefile. You specify the folder that it's going to. I don't know why it always defaults to the wrong folder. But I can pick the folder I want. I can make a new folder. Oops. I need to do that. One thing to note in ArcGIS Pro is that a lot of different operations that I found don't seem to refresh the folder for some reason. So you often will create a new feature class or do some sort of operation and it seems like nothing happened, but become very familiar with your refresh tools because you'll probably need them a lot. So for the feature class to shapefile tool, which is different than the feature class to feature class tool, you identify the folder that it's going to and you run it. And that's all. So you can't use this if you want to, you can't use this to rename shapefiles, but it does have one advantage in that if you wanted to export a whole bunch of shapefiles at once, you can enter all of them, enter the folder, and then run it and save yourself some time because it will write those pretty quickly now. So again, there's always a lot of different ways to approach this, right? We can do it from our table of contents. We can do it from our catalog. We can go into our toolboxes and find the feature class. You know, if you can't remember exactly which one you want, you can do a search and come up with the available tools. So there's that feature class to shapefile is the one that we just used. Feature class to feature class will move it to another geodatabase, or feature class to feature class will convert the file to a shapefile. So you can also search for the descriptions of your tools here and it'll come up with those. So does anybody have any questions about how to make a shapefile? Dead horse kicked. Why am I so insistent on shapefiles and not another method?
They're universal for the most part.
Yep, that's a good answer. Let's see, we already talked about the catalog. So how do you send a single feature class from a geodatabase folder?
Can you just right click on the feature class underneath the catalog pane?
And do what?
Export it.
To?
Feature class, what do you want to send it to?
But what is that feature class going to be in? If you're sending it to me.
Oh, shapefile.
shapefile because you can't get at my geodatabase, right?
Yep.
You can move a feature class to another geodatabase, but you have to have access to it. So to share just a feature class on its own, you can't go into a Windows Explorer folder and pull that feature class out of this complex network of files and send just that feature class. Why not just send the whole geodatabase?
Seems like a lot of information to have to send, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe.
so it could be like the geodatabases that you guys have made so far have been fairly straightforward. I've only been working on this project for a couple of weeks, and my geodatabase is one fairly complex. It's starting to collect tables that don't even mean anything to me anymore. I don't know what these are. I should just delete them. Geodatabases can get messy. They can also get huge. I learned a new way to fatally crash my computer this week, which is to work in a geodatabase for several days, creating lots of information, and then have it spontaneously corrupt for no reason that you can find. And then when you have figured out how to repair and reuse your database, go delete the old one and your whole computer crashes. I did it repeatedly for the last 2 days. It was very exciting. Blue screen of death. It's also a 65 megabyte geodatabase when I zip it. So it's not an easy thing to attach to an email. So just another way to emphasize, you should understand the structure of the data that you're working with and understand ways that you might want to share it.
So how do you back up your database?
It depends on the systems that I'm working in. So that one existed on a OneDrive file, which doesn't have any built-in backup systems. Luckily, there's this really great tool in your geoprocessing toolbox called Recover Geodatabase, Recover File Geodatabase, which fixed my file geodatabase. I don't know what was wrong with it, but it worked after I ran this. I also was able to take the one that was supposedly corrupt and open it in QGIS. So I don't know if Esri is just a little bit more sensitive to certain changes in the file structure, but the underlying data was still there and totally usable in QGIS. I just couldn't get it back into Esri without re-exporting everything and going through a lot of steps that I didn't want to deal with. So, but yeah, having a regular planned backup routine is a really smart thing to have. And one of the problems that I had was creating the geodatabase itself took me several days. So there wasn't a good point at which I could stop and back things up because I couldn't unload the data to get it to a point where I could copy it. So a little bit of a long-winded explanation, but so back to sharing data formats. GIS systems are meant to communicate data, and one of the ways that we communicate them is by sharing them. So it's really good to know how to do that. You guys also have now at your fingertips the tools from ArcGIS Online. So I could always load this information from my geodatabase to a online feature class using the share tools that Megan pointed out. So I could take this project data layer that I've made here, and I could save this as a web layer or a web map. And then whoever's using it could use my web layer. I would have to know that I was setting it up in a way that they could access. So if they weren't part of the University of Alaska organization, I would want to share it with everyone. If they were part of my organization, I could just share it with that. Or I could use it specifically within a group. I'm not 100% sure whether or not you can add people outside of your group, your organization to a group, but that might be one way to share things with other people specifically. Otherwise, it would have to be universally available. So the web portal is another way to share data as a web layer, which essentially functions very similar to a geodatabase. So how do we share raster data? This one's almost too big to get into. Hopefully you've seen the examples of this in the labs that we've had so far. Raster data comes with a lot of additional information. They can have files that tell how to display the colors. They can have files that tell how to build the pyramids, where we talked about pyramids, which are used to help you zoom in and out. So it might, all of that information might be enclosed in a single GeoTIFF, which is a digital format specifically designed for geospatial raster information. Or it might be in a simple image file that has accompanying data files, just like a shapefile, or a whole folder of files similar to a geodatabase. And the previous lecture of this class included this information about GML, which is meant to be a universal data exchange format, again, developed by the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, which sets a lot of the open standards for GIS exchange between different user groups and different software types. But I haven't found any strong evidence that Esri is working towards or that Esri is currently incorporating it into ArcGIS Pro. I assume that it's a future goal, and I may be missing things, but I haven't yet identified it, except for this tool within our ArcGIS Pro, which is supposed to be an exchange that can support GML. I tested it. Even with our amazing university license, I would expect to be able to use these tools, and I don't know why it failed. But so far, I'm not excited about Esri's support of the GML environment. I think they're focusing right now on their geodatabase, their file geodatabase format. But it's something to watch for in the future. Because as we've shown with a lot of these different tools and data sources that we use, they change drastically over time, especially over 20 or 30 years. So that is the end of the information on data exchange and data creation. So we talked a lot about open sources, web sources for data in the first piece of this lecture a few weeks ago. We've talked a little bit about data conversion. We've talked about means of sharing data and how to get it from the field.